Hey everybody, Pastor Kevin here. We're going straight into session 2 in book 2 of volume 3. And we're starting on the questions are page number 19. And let's jump straight in. Question number 1. It is clear that Paul is very observant and paying attention to his surroundings for the purposes of his faith. How observant are you? Explain. This is just kind of an icebreaker. It's one of those things that's pretty important. I will probably use this. This is a general stereotype, but dudes, people like me, often tend to be not very observant. And when I'm saying that is we kind of start plugging along and we're not paying attention to our surroundings. We're not necessarily paying attention to responses from our spouses, perhaps, or things like that. This is one of those things. It's very clear Paul is very observant, and in fact, observant with a purpose in mind. And that's what I want you to keep track of. He's observant with a purpose in mind. And the whole point is, how is it I communicate this gospel to this people, this new place that I'm at, you see? And I think it's important to recognize our own shortcomings, even if we're not very observant. There are things we can do. We should pay attention. There are some... We can't just chalk up all of our little faults to like, oh, that's just how I am. In this case, I'd suggest, for more reasons than just the gospel, it is good to be observing what's happening around you, whether with your spouse, your children, your family, your workplace, your school. Being very mindful of what's going on and paying attention is really important. Now, some of us just have a harder time with that, right? There are people that truly have attention deficit and things like that. And I get it. But my point is, pay attention to how closely Paul seems to be paying attention to his surroundings in this city of Athens, okay? Question number 2. In a sense, we can read Acts 17:16 and think back to Acts 15:23 through 29. How does this false worship look in a modern culture? Do you recognize it? Are you as provoked as Paul at the sight of idol worship? I'm having you go back and read the letter from the Jerusalem Council because it seems that the very key thing is to just abstain. Be careful about the idol worship, because these are, in most cases, you're talking about people who live in either a pagan environment or literally are coming from a pagan background, likely both. So they are accustomed to living life under the circumstance and situation of pagan worship. So the Jerusalem Council is trying to say, hey, in order to bring Jew and Gentile together, we need to be paying attention to our old patterns and make sure that we're not bringing them into the environment where this gospel is supposed to be shared between Jew and Gentile. Okay? Oversimplification, but you can go back and listen to the previous message on that. The issue is abstain from idols. Be careful of the practices that you're actually doing that might be considered idol worship. And you see that Paul here is provoked by everything that he sees. The city's full. It's full of idols. And I think in our culture, we don't translate idol worship the same way. We are presuming that maybe when we go to an Asian restaurant, we see a Buddha, and that is what pagan worship is, or idol worship. And while that's true, there is more around you than you can imagine. And I think it comes down to, how do we take things in culture and raise them to a level at which we are treating them like a god, right? And sometimes it's money, sometimes it's sexuality, sometimes it's fame, sometimes it's good things where they become, like, for example, is it possible to take either your spouse or your children and put them in such a high seat that it's almost pushing God to the side, because I'm trusting everything and putting everything into my child, for example. But the problem is that if you put them in such a high level, one above God, you basically are going to be crushed when they don't meet the thing that you have in mind for them, right? So there is a necessity for us to be paying attention to how we actually live our lives. Where you're going to remember this. Many of you, if you've been in the church a long time, you have the time, talent, and treasure thing, which is, where are you spending these? because ultimately you might recognize, well, there's a possible idol that's happening here. So, for example, just imagine the ancient living room. If they had one, it wasn't really a living room. They'd probably have a room, and maybe they'd have some household idols in them, and there'd be a place where they would gather and worship those idols. So they're all kind of in a thing of it as a semicircle or a quarter circle, and they're worshiping the god of choice. Now, imagine a modern living room with a TV in front of it. How much of your daily plan revolves around that show you want to watch? How much of it, the game you want to watch, the sports team, right? Those type of things. You see how quickly something can start to morph into something we put so much weight in. Now, this is not to say that you need to throw your TVs out of your house. Maybe some of you should, but you have to be paying attention. What should provoke you about how you're living in culture, or maybe how your family is, or how you're seeing culture operate all around you? Right? And then we'll get to how Paul responds. Question number 3, summarize Paul's speech in Acts 17:22 through 31 into simple points. Why these ideas? Now, I'm going to let you chase this down. There are a lot of little points you can come up with, but when you talk about how he's describing God and humans, there's a couple things I think are important to note. One, he goes after God as creator. It's clear as in there, right? Creator of everything. In fact, in a greatest sense, if you imagine the Areopagus and the temple across the way from them, that he's literally kind of calling into question even those gods with how he's approaching this. God as creator, but there's also God as judge, right? And that's another one of the simple points in here. And then, of course, it's he creates not just all of creation, but he's like God's offspring. People are literally made for a purpose type of thing. You see it kind of implicitly in here. And while there's false worship that is being kind of identified here with the gold and silver and so forth, but I want you to just kind of be paying attention to how is Paul approaching this audience? What are the key points that he feels is necessary to make? And what are the ones that maybe he left out and you were thinking, oh, maybe I would have thought maybe he would use this, and you can have that as part of your discussion. Question number 4. In Acts 17:21, Luke had described what the culture of Athens was all about. How is our culture similar? How does Paul combat this idea? It talks about the culture always looking for the new thing, right? And I think it's pretty easy. You guys can discuss this ad nauseum, because I think there are parts of our culture that are the same. There are parts of our households that are the same. It's like, do you ever get that feeling of, I just want or need something new? Maybe it's something from Amazon. Maybe it's a new car. Maybe it's, I need to repaint a room or whatever. You get a feeling of wanting something new, right? So just talk about those ideas and how we can let them get away from us. Again, I am not throwing down a gauntlet saying you should never get a new thing from Amazon. You should never paint a room. That's not what I'm saying. But understand that often this concept of always being interested in whatever the new idea, the new trend, you could think of how this has morphed and become kind of even a bigger thing in our culture. And then how does Paul actually combat it? And you can see that he's actually using, whereas in previous messages from Paul, you'd see him grabbing from Old Testament because of the context he was speaking into. Now he's speaking into the marketplace of ideas, not necessarily a Jewish synagogue. So he's using different tactics, and it makes sense. He's trying to say, hey, I saw this thing to an unknown God. Hey, you remember what some of your own poets have written? You see, it's an important idea, is finding the places where there is a closeness, or even maybe a close understanding, and then identifying differences, right? So it's an important approach that Paul is taking, and we should be taking this at least, even when we go back to, are we even observant? Are we observing that there are things that are different? Are we observing in culture where there are things that we would actually, as Christians, celebrate along with culture, but maybe we would tweak it a little bit, or we'd say our reasons for doing so are going to be quite different, and that would be part of the conversation that we might have. Question number 5. Paul uses quotes from ancient poets. Why would he do this? Why would he base his argument on his observation of a random altar in Athens? I kind of spoke to this in the last question, but it does allow you to go deeper into, okay, he's grabbing information and his observations of the culture and the knowledge that he's picked up from being around the marketplace, from actually walking through the city. Are we doing those same type of things? Question number 6. Paul seems to be linking repentance with knowledge, or somehow removing ignorance. What do you think he means? What is he saying that they are ignorant about? How might repentance lead to this kind of knowledge? It is really interesting that somehow part of this is like he talks about, them crawling along, trying to feel their way toward God. And he's talking about a type of knowledge, like literally knowing something or removing an ignorance, a blocking. And I want you to think about that and talk about that maybe with your own, this may be helpful, maybe with your own faith. You could talk about the ignorance that you feel like was removed when you came to know Jesus, when the Spirit of the living God, who is wisdom for us in every way, you could say like, well, this is this knowledge. And you can actually think about it like Paul even writes in Romans 1 how there is knowledge of kind of a natural understanding of God that everyone kind of can't deny. But it's talking kind of that transition from that kind of knowledge to this kind of knowledge. And the whole point is at the core of this is a resurrected man named Jesus, right? So there is this trust idea that has to happen. There's a belief in, this did happen. This amazing thing did happen. So anyway, take some time to think and talk about that in your group. Question number 7. Read Romans 1:18 through 23. Paul wrote these words much later than this event in Athens. How does it connect with his speech in Acts 17? Again, I got ahead of myself. Please read that and see that there is a what are called a general revelation, a general knowledge of things, but then there is a special revelation that we come to through the Spirit of the living God, right? By God's power, he enables us to see things differently. Our worldview is different because we start to see things through the lens of the one who came to save us, right? We start to see it through King Jesus, who was enthroned on a cross, who has defeated Satan, sin, and death on our behalf through his life, his death, and his resurrection. When you start to see that as the beginning lens through all of your worldview, then things change. The things you observe actually get observed in a slightly different light even. And even the natural things that Paul talks about in Romans 1, even those you see in a more clearer sense, right? God's power, his omniscience, his presence, and so forth. You start to see those and actually lean in to them, right? It's not just an observing like, oh, I got it. That mountain's really majestic. It goes beyond that. Now you recognize the majesty behind what you see and observe and so forth. Question number 8. Paul is accused of preaching foreign divinities in Athens. When we proclaim Jesus today, how is our situation similar? What can we observe from Paul's approach that can help us today? I've been talking about the similarities, and this allows you to kind of take all of the questions and kind of put them together and kind of come up with maybe your own strategies for how you would actually see your individual like family life, work life, and so forth. And because we are preaching, for all intents and purposes, a foreign divinity. Right? Or a divinity in general. In a world, if you listen to the sermon from Pastor Sam, I don't know if Isaac did the same thing, but the idea of that all these roads lead to the same place, right? You can just pick any one that you want. They all go to the same place. And that kind of an idea of just kind of a generalized, irrelevant, specific divinity is the waters that we swim in Western culture. You have to recognize that people don't have, as soon as you get exclusive, as soon as you get specific of you must go a particular way, then everyone kind of turns on you. And that's what we're doing. That's what we're called to do, is literally let the gospel speak for itself. We're not trying to upset anyone. We're not trying to bring an offense before the gospel itself, but we're trying to say, hey, no, there is a God. And the truth is that God is going to judge everybody. He created everything. And if you keep taking that down to its ultimate direction, is like he's also the one who is perfectly able and has the right to judge everything by his own standard, because he is the one who brings morality and so forth. So That's it's a rough message to a lot of people in our culture, but we need to learn. If there's anything we're learning from this, we need to learn the marketplace of ideas in which we are actually embedded and how to speak into them, calling out the things that are good and saying, I agree with this. And then maybe the motivations underneath saying, I might be motivated slightly different. And then pushing back against those things that are like, I just don't know why this makes sense, you see. So it's us being able to use the wisdom of the Spirit of the living God to actually live life in the context that we are: work, school, family, home, etc. Right? And that takes us to our tending the fire section. And ultimately, it's getting to the exact same point. Paul has been going to the synagogue and he's been speaking in a particular way. He's been using a certain amount of wisdom about Old Testament knowledge and scriptural knowledge in order to speak to them. But then he moves, in this particular scene, he's moving into a different marketplace of ideas. And in that marketplace, he's trying to find the things that are valuable, the things that are understood. Like what are the things that a culture sees as the rules that should be followed, right? Sometimes they're very much unwritten. And trying to understand how they get there so that you can speak into them, not in a ungracious or mean way, but in a way that shows that no, actually there is a God who I think you would realize when you stand on top of a mountain, you recognize everything and how beautiful and wonderful that awe that you have, that comes from somewhere. But it's even greater than that because it's found in the face of a man named Jesus from 2,000 years ago who would give his very life to save you. How are we doing actually sharing that story? Are we challenging ourselves to know what's going on in the workplace of ideas, in the marketplace of ideas all around us? Because it's a good challenge. Maybe some of us are better at knowing how the workplace or the marketplace works and the culture. And maybe some of us are better speaking into it. That's fine. We need to be together, unified as a church of our King to actually tell his good news, right? So how are you doing that? How is your group doing that? How can they do it better? Because it's not about how much or how much success we had or how many times we had. It's about actually being obedient to the very love we've received. We're like, yeah, we want to give it back. And the way we do that is to continue to speak the goodness of our King, the good news that he has come to save his wretched and pitiable creation in many ways and bring them back to himself. What a powerful message that can be. But we need to be looking around us and seeing ways that we can speak that actually make sense, are clear, and not adding any other obstacles before the gospel itself. So I pray that God goes with you. I pray that you have a wonderful study this week. I also want to let you know that in all likelihood, you won't be having videos for a bit of time. I'm going to be taking a vacation with my family. I may try to piece some things together, but want to make sure you're aware of that. Yeah, love you guys. If you need anything, just send a message through.